Yo, welcome to another edition of the Roundball Ramble podcast. I am your host, Corbin Ford. You can follow me on Twitter if you are so inclined at Corbin NBA. This is a Sports Ethos presentation, so make sure to check out Sports Ethos on Twitter at Sports Ethos Online, sportsethos.com, SPORTSETHOS. They have everything. Basketball, baseball, football, disc golf. That's right, disc golf. Gambling, fantasy, all of it. You want it, they have it. So check them out one more time on Twitter at Sports Ethos Online, sportsethos.com. All right, y'all, we're going back to some of my favorite topics, which are the team dives, the transaction time. We're getting close, a couple weeks away from the trade deadline, but we're also getting closer and closer when these lottery balls are really going to start to matter. And so now it is time for our, I want to say bi-monthly check-in, whatever the case may be, looking at these lottery teams. It's a lottery team check-in, and I am joined, as usual for these shows, by my good friend, by author, former basketball analytics consultant, Richard Liu. Check him out on Twitter at RVLHoops. Make sure to check out his Substack and his Amazon author page. I'll have both links in the description below this show, so definitely make sure to do that. Richard, how are you today, sir?
Yeah, doing great. Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, it definitely is something. I'm excited to have you back on and to talk some lottery teams, just talk some basketball in general. We have a lot of parity, in the West still. The East is definitely shaking out a lot more, a little bit in terms of teams that are better and teams that are kind of sinking toward the bottom. And the West has some clearly bad teams now. So we kind of want to go into it. If you fire up Tankathon, if y'all listening, already have here for your listening pleasure, but we already have some of these teams here. We're going to do a little checkup on the board, little race update. Houston right now sits at number one. They're 10-35. They have lost 12 games, lost 10 in a row. Right behind them is the Detroit Pistons, who are 12-36. They've lost their last 3-7 in their last 10. Right behind them is Charlotte. They're 12-34. They've won their last game, but they're 2-8 in their last 10. Another team 2-8 in their last 10 is San Antonio. They had a big 36-point game from Keldon Johnson to beat the Spurs. But aside from that, they're 14-31. Then you get a little bit better. You get the Orlando Magic. They're 16-28. They've lost 2 in a row. They are 3-7 in their last 10. And then you get this glut of teams that really don't want to be in this mix. You have the Washington Wizards at 19-26. They're 5-5 in their last 10. The Raptors are also 5-5 in their last 10. They're 20-25. Tied with them are the Lakers, who are at 20-25. They lost their last game to the Kings in a nail-biter. They're 6-4 in their last 10, awaiting the return of Anthony Davis at the start of next month. Phoenix, actually, surprise, surprise. Phoenix has been in a slump come the new year, just been abysmal. They've lost 3 in a row. They're 1-9 in their last 10. They're 21-24. And then tied with them, but also sitting at 10th, is Chicago. They're 21-24, 5-5 in their last 10. They've won their last 2. Just important to note, I mentioned the Lakers and the Bulls because of their record, but the Lakers pick would go to the Pelicans, and as it currently stands, Chicago's pick, I think, going to Orlando. It's not top 4 protected. Yeah, so that's just an update on the 10. We're going to round out the lottery. Portland, Minnesota, Oklahoma City, and Indiana round that out. But we're not going to go too deep into them. We're looking at the teams that are still, right at that race for Wembanyama, for Scoot Henderson, the Thompson twins, all of that. And so, Richard, I throw it over to you. We've kind of gone down some of these teams here in terms of where they stand in this race to the bottom. What team do you want to dive in first? I know you do a lot of scouting to these squads and take some notes and observations.
Yeah, just kind of start looking at, the 2 teams in Texas, San Antonio, Houston. It's kind of interesting with these 2 teams because they're taking kind of they're taking different approaches to rebuilding. So on the one hand, you have Houston, which is kind of on more of an individual focus where they're kind of where they're concentrating more on kind of building up, guys like Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Sengun, but there isn't really kind of a unifying system or structure. So it's a lot more chaotic. There's been some reports coming down about, kind of the culture and how it might be negatively kind of impacting their development. So it's interesting kind of to see how this is all kind of playing out as they kind of go into this as they go through their rebuild. As they've been involved in this for about 2-3 seasons. So, and to see if it's actually going to, if there's any hope for improvement. Whereas on the flip side, you have San Antonio, which is using kind of a more system-oriented approach. They still kind of keep their same structure, but they just don't have the talent to really kind of make the system work. So you still see little bits and flashes where you see some of the effective tactics from kind of past Spurs teams, but they just can't sustain that over 48 minutes a night. So they're kind of at the bottom for a very different reason. So if you look at Houston, a lot of this is there's not a whole lot of structure. There've been some some things that have come out recently. John Wall had an interview talking about some of the things that kind of went on with their culture and how, even though maybe he was feeling that he could produce for the team, they wanted to prioritize the playing time of their younger players, specifically Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green. And he kind of, pushed back against that. And then Eric Gordon's kind of been unhappy for the last few years because he's a veteran player and he's kind of stuck in this rebuilding situation. And so they asked him if there were signs of improvement, and he said there isn't any improvement. Things have been kind of going on as they've been. So that whole kind of is the backdrop of kind of how they're trying to develop some pretty good, talented young players with some potential, like Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Sengun, Kevin Porter Jr. But kind of the approach has kind of been very disjointed. They don't always do the kind of the little things that like defending or ball movement, but that ball movement that really kind of correlate to winning. So, and then it's a little bit more of a free for all in terms of kind of who kind of leads the offense, who they run their offense through. So at times, kind of you'll get Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green getting a little shot happy. So then Jabari Smith doesn't feel like he's getting touches. So then whenever he does touch the ball, he feels like he needs to shoot it every time or else he's not going to get the ball. And then you have these occasional little bursts from Sengun where you see, great passing, ability and, maybe the potential to be kind of a focal point, kind of a hub for their offense that can allow them to kind of score off different kind of passing and cutting kind of plays, but they just don't do this very often. So in addition to possibly getting a Wembanyama, they one of the big things that sticks out when watching them is they really need some kind of structure to really kind of bring things together into some kind of unifying some kind of unifying scheme that allows everyone to play at their best. So they probably they might need to make a coaching change at some point to make this happen. So, and that's, where
I was about to ask about that. Like, do you think that you have the man for the job in Stephen Silas? Because on the one hand, I feel like he's kind of been given a raw deal in terms of the lack of development, not playing John Wall, you know what I mean? In that sort of way. At the same time, though, some of the lines he's been putting out there, some of the strategies coaching-wise or lack thereof, there's a lot of freedom to these young guys to just go out there, roll the ball, and play, and they're just not that type of team. Do you think that coaching change has to be made kind of to continue in their improvement based off what you've seen?
Based on the evidence of the last couple, he did kind of get a little bit of a raw deal because he came in. They thought they were going to run one more, one more year, kind of retooled around James Harden, but then he made his trade demand, and so then that they had to pivot to go to this rebuild. but but so far in this kind of rebuilding situation, they haven't really, they haven't really made a lot of positive progress, and things kind of appear to be pretty stagnant. And I think if there is an opportunity to upgrade to someone that's more of a system-oriented coach, can kind of integrate their talent in a more cohesive way, maybe also bring in some veterans that can kind of instill better habits and things like that, better habits and kind of, work ethic and, kind of, winning mentality to kind of their team. It might be worth looking at, somebody like, coach that comes to mind would be, somebody like Kenny Atkinson, who's, currently, one of the lead assistant for the Warriors, where, he had some success in Brooklyn in a much different rebuilding situation where they had no high lottery picks of any kind, just kind of cast offs, but found a way to kind of cobble things together to just gradually make them more competitive to the point where they made the playoffs and were attractive enough to sign Durant and Kyrie Irving. And then unfortunately when that
blew up in their face,
they got there, Kenny Atkinson kind of got, kind of had to
like a bridge
take
coach,
the hit.
you're thinking.
Yeah. So, I mean, if they get, if they're at that stage where they got to transition from just accumulating assets and high potential pieces to eventually transitioning to a winning team, somebody like Kenny Atkinson would be good for them.
I like that. I think that's a tremendous pick, especially since Atkinson can be that guy, like you said, chicken soup out of chicken something else, right? Or chicken salad out of chicken scratch. We'll just say that, right? And you're right. Those Brooklyn teams are fun. They had some innovative offensive principles that really made the use of the players that they had at hand. They had just enough defense. They played very solidly. You're right. And he got them up to a certain point. So maybe he's not the player to manage star talents, right? We saw how that might have worked. But then again, Kyrie and Kevin Durant, although they are definitely stars, they're a different type of player. And besides, I mean, the Rockets are nowhere near that, right? It'll be interesting, I think, first to see, and this is whether or not they do go and grab Atkinson. Like, this is whether or not he's a choice. It depends on what they do in free agency. And the reason I say it is because there's been reports that the Rockets want to make a big splash in free agency, whether that is, someone like a James Harden, a Chris Middleton, a Draymond Green, all these guys, a Fred VanVleet that are available. Mind you, I think a VanVleet would fit nice. I think Middleton would fit nice as well. I think you have a little more of an issue. Well, actually, no. Draymond Green, I think, will have a good rapport because he's already on their coaching staff right now. Atkinson is. I think, James Harden would be a interesting mix. It'd be a little different with some of the more prickly personalities. So I think in fact, let me just throw this to you as a question. Depending on what the Rockets do, and this is something we'll talk a little bit later down the road, depending on what the Rockets do in free agency, if they go after a big fish, do you change your mind on maybe having Atkinson as the coach, or were you thinking there's more of Atkinson's being the archetype of a coach you're looking for, maybe not the specific model?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because you also, when it, an element that kind of plays into this is owner Tillman Fertitta has historically not been a guy who's been willing to pay luxury tax, and that came into play in around 2017, 2018 when they were contending, because there were trades that were made kind of around the trade deadline. Instead of adding, they would shave a little bit of payroll, add some draft picks into a trade to shave some payroll to cut the luxury tax bill. So in a situation of hiring a coach, would Tillman Fertitta actually pay top dollar to get a prime coaching candidate? So then the shift would then come to, free agency. There's still mandated salary floors, and they would have this cap space that they have to use somewhere that getting a free agent, then maybe finding a coach that whoever the free agent would want. So if it was someone like James Harden, maybe Mike D'Antoni's is not currently a head coach, so maybe he maybe he comes back if you get if they come back as like a package kind of, or Harden, D'Antoni, or if you get someone like Middleton, maybe get someone like Charles Lee somebody kind of tied to whichever free agent you try to land. That's where maybe that comes into play. So it's a pretty fluid kind of situation where you might get the players first and then find a coach that fits the veterans and the guys that they already have, and see how that kind of all meshes together. So that makes sense. So that's something to look out for kind of as they kind of go through this kind of over the summer and next year or two. So see how they approach building out their team kind of in the future.
I like that. I do. I think it's going to be interesting to see where they are. We know right now they're just not great. John Wall had some enlightening things to say about the organization, calling out the blatant tanking, going after some folks that were starting. It was a lot there. That interview was illuminating. I think just as a general basketball fan, if you want to find some interesting perspectives, check out the John Wall. Just put John Wall interview on YouTube. And then also DeJounte Murray was on All the Smoke. And that was also a very interesting podcast. I listened to it and his takes on Popovich, the Spurs organization. Very, very interesting. That's all I'm going to say. But speaking of the Spurs, great segue there. Let's go to the other team down there in Texas and get your takes on that, Richard. We have the San Antonio Spurs, a team that, they lost Devin Vassell for presumably what I think will be for the rest of the season. Just recovering from that knee surgery, that arthroscopic procedure that was January 11th. So, he was spotted Tuesday doing some work on the treadmill. That was reported from Tom Osborne of the San Antonio Express News. But I don't think he's playing. And, with that being said, you have players like Jakob Poeltl, like Josh Richardson, like Doug McDermott, who could be on the block this trade deadline and could be way more useful on contending teams than they are on the San Antonio Spurs roster. But that being said, mired right there in the thick of it in terms of the tankathon race. Keldon Johnson's been nice, struggled with some inefficiency, but aside from that, has been a pretty solid scoring clog along with Vassell. Trey Jones has been steady. I've loved Zach Collins and his improved play. There's been a lot up and down, but I want to get, of course, the expert here in your analysis on the San Antonio Spurs and what you've seen, what you like, what you don't like.
Yeah, the Spurs just taking just a much different approach than Houston, where they're a little more kind of collectively focused. So even though they just don't have the talent to really pull it off, so they tried. There are little things that they try to do to kind of stay competitive. Where they know they are not very good in the half court, so they try to push pace as much as possible. They're up top five in pace. They're actually, there's a lot more ball movement. More ball movement kind of in their system. So even though they just don't have, guys who can go one-on-one and kind of score individually, they're ranked in the top 5 in assists. And so there are some times where they use little kind of movement sets to kind of, for like little stretches kind of in second quarters where Doug McDermott will get a couple of threes to go down off these little kind of curl and kind of fade actions. And then one thing that was kind of interesting, kind of for a stretch when they were maybe it was a few weeks ago, but they kind of experimented with Jeremy Sohan as a point guard, which if, you're really checking, you were thinking, looking at him last draft cycle and kind of into kind of the type of player he was coming out of college, this usage would seem really weird, but then if you look at the history of kind of different kind of forwards that they've had, it can make some sense into why they've done this, where so, considering that they had in the past Boris Diaw, Kyle Anderson. So if they, want to develop him as like a playmaking forward, kind of giving him some reps at the point to kind of let him kind of improve his ability to kind of read defenses and make plays is something that he can build on moving forward. At times it does kind of work, especially in situations where they're playing against kind of, against backcourts where they're a little undersized. So you can kind of, get Sohan matched up on a smaller guard. And then, if you get him, and then from there, you can run little handoff actions to maybe get Keldon Johnson up against kind of an undersized defender to maybe give him a different look. Or if they're, kind of playing off Sohan because he's not really a shooter at this stage, you can get little handoff, kind of threes off handoffs and things of that nature. And you can kind of read and recognize different defensive coverages based on kind of just how defenses are trying to react to kind of these kind of unusual lineups. But there's been, so there have been sort of elements of experimentation even before, Vassell went down with his injury. They were kind of, they started him for a while, then they kind of, were experimenting with him as like a 6-man to try to see if they could sustain scoring from a little bit better. But, kind of the way that they kind of have, the way that they are structured kind of now, they have some interesting pieces, but they are a little bit overextended, where Keldon Johnson is scoring in volume, but that's really not sort of it's not the role that he, should be playing moving forward. He's probably better suited as a secondary kind of, or a third option. And then, maybe, that, Vassell off the bench where he comes in, as kind of more maybe a little bit, more efficient kind of as a 6-man type. And then Sohan as that point kind of playmaking forward could be like a good complementary set of guys to, to put around a superstar, a star type guy. So then they can kind of move their team. And just kind of one of the more interesting elements that is that about this kind of Spurs rebuild is the fact that Brett Brown is Popovich's lead assistant. So we have a tie to sort of the main rebuild of the last 10 years. So you have obviously Brett Brown was the coach in Philly for the process. And so now he's in San Antonio, and they're kind of adopting some of these kind of more interesting tactics where, they're resting guys at really kind of interesting strategic moments where like Jakob Poeltl will sit against teams that have, that have centers, which is kind of counterintuitive, because you would think like you would play your best interior defender against a top flight center. And so they would use kind of those little substitutions and then kind of these other sort of alternate uses of players. And then kind of that coaching staff has come up with this kind of, interesting free throw motion for Sohan that has boosted his, free throw percentage by at least 10-20%, where instead of shooting with normal kind of with a guide hand and just kind of a normal shooting motion, they just take the guide hand off and he's shooting them one-handed. And he's been shooting, around 70% with that motion. So there are things where they're just kind of getting kind of unique kind of solutions to kind of smaller problems that will hope, can lead to bigger things. So that's kind of been kind of an interesting to watch out for. And then also as far as the trade deadline comes around, they do have guys on their team that are still showing that they have some value, where, Jakob Poeltl's, can give you a little bit of, interior defense and rebounding and, a little, efficient finishing around the basket, Doug McDermott is still pretty reliable, kind of movement, catch and shooter around the league. And then, if you need an extra 3-and-D guy, Josh Richardson, could be had for, maybe, something relatively, cheap in terms of, just,
value.
Contract, young player, second round pick, something like that. So there are guys like that they can still sell off and add and accumulate assets. So that's been interesting to see as the season has kind of been playing out.
I agree. It definitely is. I think, like you said, both those players at the start of the season, it felt like the Spurs were shopping them or trying to flip for like a first round pick each. I don't think that's going to happen. You know what I mean? I think that they're definitely someone that could probably get value in a pair. You could probably look at the Lakers or the Nets, who'd probably want to make an offer on that, and I agree. You don't want to let those guys walk in free agency. I doubt the Spurs will, even if that means maybe extending a player like, Doug McDermott, no. But let's say they extend a Jakob Poeltl. I can see them extend Jakob Poeltl on a team-friendly contract with which to flip later. If they wanted to go that route. But I don't think they let him go for anything, just for nothing. And Doug McDermott is on for the Spurs next year anyway. But Josh Richardson, you're right. As a swingman, can help a lot of teams. It's going to be interesting to see where they go with that, because you also have teams like the Magic with Terrence Ross, teams like the Rockets with Eric Gordon, these other veteran swingmen who are on these rosters that don't fit, aren't really getting a lot of time, or if they are, it's not really working out too well, and they can help another team more than they're helping their incumbent team. So I definitely think that's interesting for sure. Looking at Charlotte, I think they're a clear team that just needs to continue their bottoming out race. LaMelo Ball went down as recording this on the 19th. Y'all been listening to us on the 20th, but he went down on the 18th with another ankle injury. I think it's just time to be safe and shut it down. Hornets 12-34. Play some of the young guys. Bring James Bouknight back. See if there's anything redeemable in him. He had a good night for the Swarm a couple of days ago. Watch their game. Good, confident shot making. Just see if there's something there. If there's any value, you know what I mean. Aside from that, Bryce McGowan's, Dennis Smith Jr. Guys like that should be getting this run. I honestly think I would be looking strongly at moving not just to Kelly Oubre or Mason Plumlee, but also looking at Terry Rozier. I feel like his type of shot making, secondary ball response. He's not a lead guard, but he can play like a secondary offensive initiator. That can help a lot of teams. Again, the Lakers come to mind. You know what I mean? A team looking for offensive punch there. A few squads could use him. And yeah, he's just entering, year one of a 3-year extension on his deal, but still just 28, 29. It could work. That's something I would think about. But yeah, what do you think about the Hornets? Because I just feel like their path to me seems crystal clear.
Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, because I think they haven't been moving forward as of this season. So, yeah, exploring seeing what you can get out of somebody like Rozier, Kelly, and then maybe even PJ Washington, because they had a chance to sign him to an extension, but they weren't able to do that. So, yeah, maybe with maybe if they pair, even if they pair guys together where it's like Rozier and Washington, maybe you might get more value back in a trade just because they just don't have any other sort of additional sort of assets aside from their own first round pick, and they also owe one in 01, which which was traded on, I believe, the Kai Jones trade on draft night. So they're in a little bit of a deficit when it comes to draft picks and things of that nature. So yeah, maybe just kind of flipping guys like Rozier, flipping some veteran guys just to kind of, maybe kind of shift around some payroll and kind of find kind of better long-term pieces to kind of put around LaMelo Ball is kind of the way to go. Cause right now, it's really just LaMelo Ball kind of by him, he's kind of stuck in this kind of position kind of by himself, kind of with a team that doesn't look like it has a whole lot of upward mobility. So yeah, kind of, bottoming out to get a high pick would help, but then, kind of retooling to kind of find kind of other pieces to kind of put, to kind of play with LaMelo Ball and even find like a little bit better structure to kind of play, because they're a little bit, there was a kind of a bit of a structural shift as they went from Borrego, where they were playing, a much faster tempo system, to Steve Clifford, who's a really staunch kind of defensive minded, kind of slower pace sort of coach. And so it's interesting it's not exactly it's a really kind of a great fit with, system and kind of like where where LaMelo Ball and the system don't quite fit together, because you kind of want to use LaMelo's ability to kind of push the ball and kind of creatively kind of play in transition, kind of to kind of help the offense. But if he's kind of, stuck kind of walking the ball up, it's a little bit of it's not the best use of his skill set. So that's where another thing they kind of have to kind of have to work out as they kind of go through these next, as they go through kind of, the trade deadline, off season, and so forth.
Yeah, agreed. It's going to be interesting to see where they go, but I'm with you. I think you made a good, interesting analogy, or not a history analogy, but kind of look back into what Borrego brought to the table and the stylistic differences between a Borrego, between a Clifford. I think everyone thought this was going to happen. Clifford was not the guy for the job. It should have been interesting when you saw, a guy like Kenny Atkinson make tracks going the other direction on that team. But I still contend that having a guy like a Mike D'Antoni would have been nice. If nothing else, just to unlock the offensive potential that team had. Obviously a lot's changed. Injuries have happened. The Miles Bridges situation, no one saw coming. So it's a lot there. But at the same time, I think that, I don't know, it's an interesting mix. And obviously I don't think it's one that's well suited for the roster they have at hand. But in either event, kind of looking through a few of these teams. I mean, we know Orlando. They're a frisky team that's just not in it. They have, some players that definitely can be traded. Paulo Banchero's probably your shoo-in for Rookie of the Year. You have some good talent there. Not a whole lot to write home of. I feel they're more middle of the pack. They're just safe enough. They're not in Houston territory, but I don't think they're going to climb to, Phoenix territory anytime soon. I kind of want to wrap up on these final three teams here. Phoenix and Chicago, still want to hold out a little bit on, just because I feel like they're going to be something that we know a lot more of come trade deadline time, the direction they go. And honestly, I don't think Phoenix should really be there to begin with. They just had the month from hell, in terms of January, as that's been. But between Washington, Toronto, and the Lakers, what squad most interests you in terms of where they stand, and where they could possibly go in the lottery, as opposed to playoff contention status?
Yeah, I think Toronto is the team that's kind of the most interesting out of this, because they hold, they could go, they have the assets to buy, but they also have some pieces that are really valuable and could get them a lot in terms of a trade if they sold them off. Namely Pascal Siakam and Van Vliet, where if they actually did decide that they would sell those, Siakam would probably be the best player available on, in the trade market. And so it would be it could get him a return similar to like what a bunch of these other teams have gotten, like Atlanta, like the kind of return like Atlanta got for DeJounte Murray, or even, kind of, I mean, maybe not quite in the, Donovan Mitchell range, but maybe around the, kind of two, like the 3s or so first round picks for DeJounte Murray, where depending on the team that is interested in him, they could get a return like that. Fred VanVleet's a little bit older, kind of having a down year, but he could also be a part of a trade, and then that could get Toronto a couple of extra picks, maybe some young guys. There have been some kind of reports that maybe Orlando might be interested in Van Vliet, where it could be some kind of consolidation type trade where they have 3 point guard point guard prospects, but not a single one of them are really held down kind of the job. And so if they maybe packaged like Fultz, some combination of Fultz, Suggs, Cole Anthony, some picks, and then for Van Vliet and possibly extend him, that gets you a more solid point guard, and maybe also gives you kind of a veteran who can kind of help guide kind of the younger guys like Banchero, Bol, Wendell Carter, Franz Wagner. So that there is, there in some ways that kind of that line of thinking does kind of make sense. So it all just kind of depends on whether or not Toronto is willing to kind of just kind of start over and just kind of start over or retool and kind of build more of their team kind of along Scotty Barnes's timeline versus their veteran, versus their veterans who were still there from 2019. So that's going to be an interesting team to kind of pay attention to towards the trade deadline, because they could go either way, and they could either cash some things in to buy, get an extra piece, or they can, go in a completely different direction and then maybe get, a pretty sizable haul if they decide to do so.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's going to be really interesting to see where the Raptors fall, because they are right there on the crux. Like, I can see them go in either direction. Like you said, they have the potential with the players they have currently under contract and what they can get back in deals. Siakam, Van Vliet, obviously Gary Trent, flip those guys, see what you can get back in prospects, picks, whatever the case may be, or say, hey, we've been ravaged by injuries. It's not been easy in the East. We've had some down seasons from some of our top guys, yes, but we can just bounce back. We love what Van Vliet has given to the program over the last couple of years. We want to commit to him long term. They can also double down, and I wouldn't be against it either way. I feel like they're the team that it really is almost a good measuring stick for this transaction happy stage that, I love, that we as fans are, because on the one hand, they could be going through a rough patch right now. You know what I mean? And right now, yes, other teams are better and they haven't separated themselves above the pack or dropped so low that they're, easily blow it up. But they're in play to go either way. So I agree. It's going to be really interesting to see where they fall. And we only have a few short weeks to really find out the direction they ultimately choose to go in. But I guess I'll close real quick just talking about the Lakers. It's simple. Richard, we both know Lakers aren't trying to lose. They're trying to win. The problem is they just don't have a lot of assets in hand to make the plays they want to make, especially when every other team that's waiting to make a move has substantially more assets than the Lakers have to offer. It's either a package of your 27, your 29 first-round pick, Kendrick Nunn, a Patrick Beverley, a Russell Westbrook, and apparently Russell Westbrook's not really in trade discussion anymore. So you're looking at a Kendrick Nunn and a Beverley. That's not going to yield a whole lot of interest, And the 27, 29 first-round picks, while nice, are only inflated as much as they are because they are the only bullets in the Lakers draft chamber right now that really makes a difference, that isn't controlled by other teams or down the line, So that is the issue. I guess they could wait until the draft and have the pick that they ultimately get in addition to the 27, 29 pick. But the problem is, by that point, LeBron will have passed Kareem for all-time on the scoring list, and the Lakers will probably still be out of the playoffs. So I kind of want to throw it back to you real quick. This is less of, I was going to say it's less of a lottery question or a trade question. But honestly, here's the thing. Lakers right now, I'd say in the lottery. They don't want to be there. How do you expect they get out of it?
I'm not sure. Yeah, there's a way for them to get out of it this year, just because if you just look, they only have the one or two. Yeah, they only have maybe two first round picks to give up. But if you look at like the cost of making trades nowadays, like two first round picks is like if you look at that, like a guy like Donovan Mitchell, a team gave up 4 and it was like 3 in swaps or 4, you're talking 4 or 5, it requires 4 or 5 to get anyone who's going to really move the needle. So if you're getting, if it's 2, then it's somebody kind of little bit more incremental. So it's, are those two picks worth giving up for someone who might get you into a into a play-in spot? And, And so it's kind of, and then, they just kind of don't have like the contracts to kind of match to really make a deal work. And also, like, if these guys, the guys that they've been kind of putting in play have kind of been available for a while, and so at this point you'd say, what, at some, if they make a move, it's probably going to be something pretty minor, kind of relatively, maybe it's a piece kind of shuffle. If it might be someone in kind of the Josh Richardson, Gary Harris range, more so than anybody kind of impact. So, somebody, if it's probably closer to involving, second round picks, expiring contracts, maybe a young, maybe somebody kind of wants to take a flyer on somebody like Max Christie or something. It's kind of some, it's probably a trade along those lines on the kind of seemingly kind of lower stakes than kind of something kind of at the higher, kind of
higher
at the higher
there.
end of the kind of trade, kind of the higher end of the market. So that's, and then, so their best hope is really, kind of really, it might just be, kind of hold on, kind of just ride this out, and maybe cap space will kind of, you might be able to, use the cap space you have to kind of build a more well-rounded roster. But with this, kind of with the situation that they're in, it doesn't look like they can really do anything that will turn them around to the point where they can legitimately kind of get out,
Yeah. We're not thinking finals contention for sure with this squad, or any moves that they might make from here.
Yeah.
And that's sad. I mean, look at a team that I was hoping would be an analogy for this LeBron squad heading into the season was that 2018 Cavs squad. Remember, Derrick Rose, Jay Crowder, Dwayne Wade, all these kind of ill-fitting pieces that at the time we had potential because we were excited, LeBron, all that. And then we saw what they did, and the Cavs front office, credit to Kobe Altman and them, were able to just totally set up a brand new team, and boom, next thing you know, Jordan Clarkson, George Hill, Larry Nance Jr., these new guys come in, the greatness of LeBron back into the finals, right? Like, that's the type of hope that there was for this Lakers team. But then, I mean, that was for me. If things didn't go right, which I didn't expect they did, because that was like, this roster, come on. But obviously, we see what happens when you come in with an ill-fitting roster and you don't have the resources necessary to get yourself out of this hole. That happens. It's a roster construction trap when you've kind of meddled and got yourself into a spot where it's like, okay, now we gotta live with the results. It just so happens that you happen to have an all-time great, playing his twilight years, reaching the NBA's highest echelon of honors, and you can't seem to find your way out of playing a tough game against the Houston Rockets. You know what I mean? So I agree. Like, it's a lot there. I definitely do want to say I really hope they don't move Max Christie. Not so much because I like Max Christie. No, all due respect, 6'6" wing. His shooting stroke's pretty solid. He plays with a lot of poise. I like him. But I really was hoping the Lakers would have drafted Jaden Hardy instead of him during this draft, and we see how Jaden Hardy has looked with the Dallas Mavericks, and I think that type of play would have been perfect. Probably wouldn't have had to give the whole mid-level exception to Lonnie Walker, as much as I love him, because you might have a similar player doing the exact same type of thing, albeit younger and under team control. So Max Christie, I just need to keep him, because if he's not, then it's like a total sign by the Lakers front office that, okay, our scouting really doesn't mean anything, because we're not going to keep our players, or we're going to massively overpay them. And I feel they let a much better prospect go in Jaden Hardy. It's still very early. I understand that, but I loved Jaden Hardy as a prospect. He's my type of player, but I really thought he would translate, and so far he has. And the fact that they slipped to the Lakers, they had a chance to get him and did not get him, that's what irritates me. But Richard, thank you again, as always, for hopping on. Do you have any last thoughts on these lottery teams before we call it a wrap for this one?
Yeah, I mean, so far, yeah. So, yeah, I guess another thing to kind of watch out for as, kind of the trade deadline hits is where, you might get, a lot more of these veteran guys kind of sitting out as we get in. So, these teams might look, the lineups will look very different maybe, in March than they would be now. So there could be, and then in that process, maybe a young player or something kind of gets playing time that, wouldn't have otherwise. And, some of these guys might kind of have surprise and have some stretches. So that's, it's, there could be some new faces that could come along and kind of take advantage of opportunities kind of in these kind of situations as we get kind of closer to the end of the season and kind of the whole, sweepstakes for Wembanyama. So that'll be sort of interesting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. I agree. It's going to be something. We're going to have a show, obviously, right after the trade deadline, here in a couple of weeks with the ramifications that it had on, these lottery teams, on these teams that are right now in the lottery for Tankathon and where they might fall and what might happen there. So definitely be sure to check out that. That's going to be a fun one to kind of see, okay, we're talking about where these teams could be. Let's see what they've done and how that might impact their standings, their race to the bottom, or they climbing to the top, whatever the case may be. So that'll be here in less than a month. I'm definitely excited for that, Richard. But listen, as always, man, I appreciate you taking your time coming over here, joining me, giving me your insights, giving us your insights and notes on these squads. And I mean, it's really invaluable and something very much appreciated. So can you tell the folks where they can find you, find your work? As always, I get you here a lot. We're gonna share the mess out of it. Let's get those contacts.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at RVL Hoops on Twitter. So yeah, that's where you can go to get updates on any content that I provide. I'm on. You can search for my name on Amazon, and you should come up on my author page, and you'll get that'll give you access to all my past draft almanacs, my past preview almanacs. I come out with one of each kind of every year. So the draft almanac is going to be coming out in June, right before this draft, and then right before next season there'll be a preview almanac. So you can find those on Amazon, and then for any kind of additional kind of posts or content kind of about that I kind of think up kind of as the season kind of progresses, I use my Substack, the Addendum, and you can find that at richardlou.substack.com. So go to that if go to that kind of for some kind of seasonal kind of content, kind of some thoughts on kind of some kind of current events, or kind of event things that are kind of happening kind of around the league kind of at the time. So that's where you can kind of find me: Twitter at RVL Hoops, Amazon, and Substack.
Really appreciate that, man. Thank you again. Recommend his books. I swear by them. Check it out. Please. All of this stuff is great work. His Substack's great. I wish I could take half of the articles that you and your brother have written on your website as well, NBA Scouting Live, and print those into a book, because those are invaluable as well. They're one of my favorite pieces they've done, or one of them. I don't want to credit the wrong person. You would tell me who it was, but they looked back at the 2017 draft. This was last year, and looked back at each player and looked where they were, the scouting analysis back then, what they look like now. That was some of the best work that I've seen.
That was Alan. He writes most of the content for NBA Scouting Live. So you want to,
it's beautiful.
Check out some more content. He does great stuff. He does great stuff on that.
Y'all make a great team. Yeah, and I'm about to say, and if Richard's work on the trade buyers and sellers that he's did this past, I want to say almost a month ago now.
Yeah.
You wrapped up the series on that. So good. And like I said, I have the link to the Substack to the Amazon page. Can't speak enough about it. That's why I took another minute to share more about it. So definitely do that. Listen, I had to say all that because not a whole lot to say about myself. If you're interested, follow me on Twitter at CorbinNBA. Definitely appreciate any of the love there. Also on Instagram for however you want to look that up. You can check out Sports Ethos on Twitter at Sports Ethos, SportsEthos. Online, sportsethos.com. But this has been a great episode as always. Until next time, y'all, we are out. For Richard, for myself, we are Frosty. Y'all stay frosty and talk to y'all real. All right.